Would you dare to walk into hell on earth with your own 2 feet? In 1940, man voluntarily allowed himself to be sent to Auschwitz by the Nazis. He knew it could be the end of his life, yet he smiled as he walked through the gates of death. Why did he do this unthinkable thing? And what happened when he tried to warn the world about the hell he saw inside? In September 1940, as a gray dawn settled over Auschwitz, rows of prisoners stood motionless in the yard, their striped uniforms heavy with mist. The sharp bark of German commands sliced through the silence. One man collapsed too slow, too weakened, was shot without hesitation. The others didn't flinch. They couldn't. But among them stood a prisoner who carried something different behind his hollow eyes. Emaciated like the rest, with the number 4859 stitched to his chest. He wasn't here by accident. He had chosen this. Witold Pilecki had volunteered to enter Auschwitz. Not to escape, not even to survive. He came to gather evidence, to build a resistance, to report the truth from inside the darkest place on earth. What kind of man walks willingly into hell, armed only with a false identity and a mission no one believes he will return from? The answer lives within these walls and in a story history nearly forgot. Before he stepped into the gates of Auschwitz, Witold Pilecki had already lived several lifetimes. Born in 1901 in what was then the Russian Empire, he grew up in a Poland that technically didn't exist. The nation had been partitioned, divided between empires that sought to erase its culture and spirit. But within Polish families like the Pileckis, patriotism was kept alive like a hidden flame. That quiet defiance would shape everything Witold became by the age of 17. He was already fighting. First against the Bolsheviks during the Polish-Soviet War. And then, as the 1930s gave way to chaos, against a new darkness rising in the West, when Nazi Germany invaded Poland in September 1939. Pilecki, then a reserve cavalry officer, returned to active duty. He fought in a desperate, losing battle. Poland fell quickly, crushed between 2 giants, Hitler and Stalin. But the defeat only hardened his resolve as the Polish state was dismantled. He helped found the Tajna Armia Polskotha, secret Polish army, one of Europe's first underground resistance groups. From safe houses and church basements, they recruited men and women to distribute leaflets, gather intelligence, and sabotage German supply lines. But by early 1940, rumors began to surface of something far worse. A new German facility near the town of Auschwitz. They called it Auschwitz. At first, no one understood what the camp really was. Officially, it was said to house political prisoners. Unofficially, whispers of horror leaked out of starvation, executions, worked to death. But there were no photographs, no documents, no credible intelligence from inside. It was a black hole of silence. And the world, still skeptical of German atrocities, didn't listen to rumors. Pilecki understood. To expose what was truly happening, someone had to go inside. The idea was unthinkable. To get arrested on purpose and survive long enough to gather intelligence? It bordered on suicide. But Pilecki didn't hesitate. He proposed the mission himself, volunteering to be caught in a Nazi roundup using false papers. Even his fellow resistance leaders tried to dissuade him, but to him, there was no greater act of patriotism than bearing witness. If Poland was bleeding, someone had to count the wounds. If men were being broken and burned, someone had to return with the truth. And so, on September 19, 1940, he walked into the jaws of the beast. They took his name first. When Pilecki arrived at Auschwitz, he was no longer a man, but a number 4859. His forged identity, Tomasz Serafisky, meant little now. His head was shaved. His civilian clothes stripped. He was issued rags and a bowl and thrust into the camp like dust tossed into a furnace. Auschwitz was a machine built not only to kill, but to erase. And yet, from the moment he crossed the threshold, he began building something quietly defiant. A network, it started with glances, a gesture, a coded word. The Polish underground was skilled in the language of subtlety, and within weeks, Pilecki identified fellow resistance members among the prisoners' men broken in body, but not in spirit. Together, they began to whisper, to share, to watch. And slowly, the organization of military union was born, an underground resistance unit inside Auschwitz itself. The idea was impossible, and yet it worked. By winter 1940, Pilecki's network included hundreds of prisoners. They tracked SS officers, mapped barracks, cataloged murders. He trained messengers to memorize intelligence, risking beatings, frostbite, or worse. He organized secret prayer groups, food sharing, and a fragile morale that held desperate men together. In the very heart of death, he planted the seeds of resistance, and all the while, he waited for a way to communicate with the outside. By 1941, that opportunity came. A smuggled note. A released prisoner. Bits of information leaking out into the world beyond the barbed wire. Pilecki's reports reached the Polish resistance in Warsaw, and through them, the Allied governments in London. His messages were staggering: torture, executions, medical experiments, systematic extermination. Auschwitz, he wrote, is a place built to destroy not only life, but the idea of man. But the world remained skeptical. The scale was too monstrous to believe, and inside the camp, the danger multiplied. The SS was growing suspicious. Random searches increased. Prisoners vanished overnight. Pilecki's network tightened. But still, he pressed forward. He sent more reports. Organized minor sabotage. Risked exposure daily. The choice was always the same: act or disappear. And yet for almost 2 years he survived barely. By 1942, he knew the mission had reached its limit. The Allies had the reports. But Auschwitz was expanding. More trains, more gas, more death, and so Pilecki made the most radical decision of all: he would escape. In April 1943, after 2.5 years inside Auschwitz, Witold Pilecki enacted a plan that seemed as impossible as his entry. Escape. By now, the camp had grown monstrous. Barracks overflowed. Crematoria belched smoke day and night. Entire transports arrived only to vanish within hours. And still, the world did not act. Pilecki knew his reports were reaching London, but he also knew they were being buried under disbelief, bureaucracy, and politics. Auschwitz was too horrific to be real, and so it was easier to look away. He had done everything he could from within. Now, he had to get out and shout louder. Pilecki coordinated with 2 trusted prisoners, carefully mapping the guards' rotations, the blind spots between watchtowers, and the timing of roll calls. On a rainy night in late April, they slipped into a bakery warehouse near the camp's edge, cut through the lock, and ran. Behind them, Auschwitz buzzed with alarms. Dogs howled. Spotlights swept the fields. But by dawn, the 3 men were gone, hiding in nearby woods, sustained by stolen bread and sheer willpower. They reached Warsaw 2 weeks later. Pilecki immediately presented his full report to the Polish underground and, through diplomatic channels, to the British. It was the most detailed, first-hand account of the Holocaust the Allies had yet seen. He included camp blueprints, prisoner numbers, the use of gas chambers, and even proposed an audacious idea: a coordinated Allied bombing of Auschwitz's crematoria and train lines. "Stop the machinery," he pleaded. "Interrupt the slaughter." The response was devastating. The Polish government, in exile, forwarded his plans. British officials labeled them unrealistic. American officials, even after verifying the details, feared civilian casualties and doubted the military value of such a strike. Some thought the reports were exaggerated. Others simply deemed them politically inconvenient. The request was shelved. Pilecki, stunned but undeterred, returned to work. He joined the underground's home army, trained new recruits, fought in the 1944 Warsaw Uprising. He was wounded, captured, and spent the final months of the war in a German POW camp. But still, he survived. When the war ended, he emerged into a new world and a new nightmare. Poland had been liberated by the Soviet Union, and Stalin's shadow now loomed over Warsaw. Pilecki, once hunted by Nazis, was now marked by communists as a threat. The man who risked his life to expose. For nearly half a century, Witold Pilecki existed only in whispers. His bravery, his sacrifice, his mission suppressed beneath layers of political silence. In communist Poland, history was carefully edited. Heroes were those who fit the new narrative, loyal to the Soviet Union, aligned with Marxist ideology, sanitized for public display. A man like Pilecki, Catholic, anti-Nazi, anti-communist. A soldier of the Polish underground, was dangerous not because he failed, but because he succeeded without permission. The regime didn't just fear what he had done. They feared what he represented, so they erased him. His name was struck from the records. His Auschwitz reports were hidden away, classified. His children were watched. Friends who spoke of him too loudly were silenced. In schoolbooks, the camps were described vaguely. Resistance within them, myth mentioned, et al. Was generalized, anonymized. The story of one man who volunteered to enter Auschwitz was simply too powerful, too uncompromising, too inconvenient for a system built on obedience. But it wasn't just Poland. Even in the West, Pilecki's name struggled to surface. His reports had been dismissed in real time, overshadowed by broader strategies, and eventually forgotten in the flood of post-war reconstruction. The Allies, eager to move on, rarely revisited the missed opportunities his intelligence represented. His proposal to bomb the railways to Auschwitz was never seriously reconsidered. His warnings lost in the bureaucracy of disbelief. And so, while the world honored figures like Schindler and Wallenberg, Pilecki remained in the shadows. There were no memorials, no movies, no chapters in history textbooks, just a number 4,859, and a silence that lasted for decades. Only after the fall of communism in 1989 did the truth begin to resurface. Files were declassified. Survivors began to speak. Journalists uncovered fragments of the buried reports. And suddenly, a forgotten name began to take shape. A cavalry officer, a father, a spy, a man who walked into hell not to save himself, but to tell the world what hell looked like. Today, Witold Pilecki is remembered not simply as a soldier, but as a moral compass. His reports from Auschwitz now stand among the earliest and most comprehensive eyewitness accounts of the Holocaust. Historians credit him with documenting atrocities before the world was ready to believe them. His writings, recovered and translated, now circulate in museums, archives, and classrooms. His story, once silenced, is taught to new generations not just as history, but as warning. In 2006, Poland posthumously awarded him the Order of the White Eagle, its highest civilian honor. His name adorns schools, streets, even military academies. But honors, as powerful as they are, cannot fully contain his legacy, because Pilecki did not seek recognition. He did not ask for statues or medals. What he demanded, what he gave his life for, was truth. He believed that even in the face of monstrous cruelty, the human spirit could resist. That silence was complicity. That bearing witness, even at the cost of everything, was a duty worth dying for. His courage reminds us that heroism is not measured by victory, but by conviction, and that sometimes the most powerful resistance begins not with a gun, but with a choice to enter the gates when everyone else is trying to escape them, to write even when no one is reading, to speak even when the world isn't listening. Pilecki's story closes the loop. It opened, not with his death in a prison cell, but with his return from oblivion. From the silence imposed upon him, his voice has returned, clear, unflinching, and impossible to ignore. And now it is ours to carry forward. He entered Auschwitz with a false name. He left it with the truth the world refused to see. He died without recognition, buried by regimes that feared his defiance more than his reports. But today, Witold Pilecki walks back into history not as a number, not as a whisper, but as a man who chose witness over safety, sacrifice over silence. Some heroes charge with banners, others move in shadows, carrying the weight of what must be known. And when history hesitated, he did not.